The vast Arizona desert was a canvas of reds and oranges under the setting sun. I had always been drawn to its rugged beauty, the way it stretched endlessly, touching the horizon. As a tourist, I sought the quiet adventure it promised, a break from my monotonous city life. Little did I know, I was about to embark on an adventure that would haunt me for the rest of my days. I rented a Jeep from a local outfitter, eager to explore the desert trails. The man behind the counter, a grizzled old-timer with deep-set eyes, handed me the keys and a map. "Stick to the trails," he warned, his voice grave. "People get lost out there, and the desert ain't kind to the lost." I laughed it off. I was an experienced hiker and had all the necessary gear. What could possibly go wrong? The first few hours were blissful. I drove along the dusty trails, stopping occasionally to take photos or admire the view. But as the sun dipped lower, a sense of unease crept over me. The trail seemed less distinct, the landmarks on the map no longer matching the terrain before me. I realized I was lost, just as the last light of day vanished, leaving me in darkness. I tried to retrace my steps, but it was useless. The desert had changed around me, the familiar rocks and cacti now alien and menacing. I decided to camp for the night, hoping to find my way back at dawn. But sleep was elusive. The desert was eerily silent, the usual sounds of nocturnal creatures absent. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath. In the middle of the night, a sudden noise jolted me awake. Footsteps. They were deliberate, circling my tent. I called out, asking who was there, but the only answer was the echo of my own voice. The footsteps stopped, and I peered out of the tent flap. A figure stood at the edge of my campsite, a silhouette against the starry sky. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice betraying my fear. The figure didn't move or speak. It just stood there, watching. I retreated into my tent, zipping the flap closed. I didn't sleep a wink for the rest of the night. At first light, I emerged to find no sign of the visitor, no footprints in the sand, nothing disturbed. Had it been a dream? Shaken, I packed up and continued my attempt to find the trail. Hours turned into days. I conserved my water, rationed my food, but the desert was relentless. The heat was suffocating, the nights freezing. I was a speck in an ocean of sand and stone, and hope was slipping through my fingers like the fine desert dust. On the fourth day, I reached a peak that offered a view of the surrounding expanse, and there, in the distance, I saw a town, Salvation. I mustered the last of my strength and headed toward it. But as I approached, I realized something was off. The town was silent, the buildings decrepit and abandoned. A ghost town, forgotten by time. Desperation turned to despair. I was so close to rescue, yet it felt further away than ever. I wandered the empty streets, shouting for anyone, but my voice was swallowed by the void. That's when I heard it, a whisper on the wind, a voice that wasn't my own.
"Lost.
I spun around, searching for the source, but I was alone, or so I thought.
Lost."
The whisper came again, closer this time. I followed it, drawn by a force I couldn't explain. It led me to an old mine at the edge of town. The entrance was a gaping maw in the earth, a darkness that beckoned. Against my better judgment, I entered. The cool air was a relief from the desert heat, but the darkness was total, oppressive. I switched on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the black. The whisper guided me deeper into the mine, the voice growing clearer with each step. I reached a chamber, the walls glistening with minerals. And there, in the center, was a man. He was old, his skin like leather, his eyes reflecting the light of my flashlight like a cat's. "You're lost," he said, his voice the one I'd been following. "I am," I admitted. "Can you help me?" He nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "The desert takes," he said, "but sometimes it gives back." He led me through the mine, through tunnels I hadn't seen, and out into the daylight. I was on the trail, the town nowhere in sight. "Thank you," I said, turning to him, but he was gone, vanished as if he'd never been there at all. I made it back to civilization, back to my life in the city, but the desert had changed me. I'd seen its heart, felt its soul, and sometimes, when the wind howls through the canyons of steel and glass, I hear the whisper again, "Lost." And I wonder if part of me is still out there, wandering the endless trails, forever searching for the way home.
I am an archaeologist, and in my 30 years of career, I have had so many mysterious encounters, but this story is very close to my heart. Maybe because at that time I was thinking that I was very close to death, or maybe because this encounter is very strange to me. I still can't say whether it was real or not. Okay, no more secrets. Let's begin. As the sun dipped below the horizon of the Sahara, casting long shadows over the undulating dunes, I settled into my tent for the night. The day had been long and arduous, filled with the meticulous work that is the lifeblood of archaeology. I was alone, my team having left for a supply run to the nearest town, which was more than just a few hours' drive away. The isolation didn't bother me. I had spent many nights like this, surrounded by nothing but sand and stars. But tonight felt different. There was a stillness in the air, a silence that seemed to press against my ears. I tried to shake the feeling, attributing it to the exhaustion of the day's work. I was cataloguing the last of the day's findings when I heard it, a faint scraping sound outside the tent. I paused, listening intently. The sound came again, closer this time, like the slow drag of metal against sand. My heart began to race. It wasn't the wind. This was deliberate, rhythmic. I called out, "Who's there?" No answer. The scraping stopped. I reached for the flashlight and unzipped the tent flap, peering into the darkness. The beam of light cut through the night, revealing nothing but the endless desert. I stepped out, the cool sand under my feet, and scanned the area. Still nothing. I convinced myself it was just a desert animal, curious about the intruder in its domain. I returned to my work, but the sense of unease remained, a nagging thought at the back of my mind that I was not alone. Hours passed, and I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. I dreamt of ancient civilizations, of pharaohs and tombs, and of something lurking just beyond the light, watching me with unseen eyes. I awoke with a start. The tent was suffocatingly hot, and the sun was already high. I had overslept. I rushed outside expecting to see the signs of my team's return, but there was only silence. The jeep was gone, the tracks erased by the night's winds. Panic set in. I checked my radio, but there was only static. They should have been back by now. I tried to calm myself, to think rationally. They could have had vehicle trouble, or perhaps they'd found something that required a detour. Yes, that must be it. I decided to continue working, to keep my mind occupied. But as I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I spun around repeatedly, half expecting to see someone standing there, but there was only the empty desert. The day wore on, and still no sign of my team. I began to gather my gear, preparing to make my way to the rendezvous point on foot. It was a foolish plan. The desert is no place for the unprepared, but I couldn't just sit and wait. As I packed, I found something that hadn't been there before, a piece of weathered parchment, half buried in the sand near my tent. I picked it up, my hands trembling. The writing on it was ancient, hieroglyphs that spoke of a curse, of those who disturbed the sacred sands never finding their way home. I dropped the parchment as if it were on fire. This had to be a prank, my team's idea of a joke. But it wasn't funny. It was cruel. I set out, the sun a relentless enemy above me. I walked for hours, my water supply dwindling, my skin burning. The desert stretched on forever, a maze with no exit. As night fell, I realized I was hopelessly lost. The stars offered no guidance, the dunes no shelter. I collapsed, the sand cool beneath me, the sky vast and uncaring. Time became a distant concept as I lay there, caught between the realms of consciousness and the void. My eyes fluttered open to the sight of silhouettes against the starlit sky. They were people, their features indistinct in the dim light. They murmured amongst themselves in hushed tones, a language that was foreign to my ears. I attempted to call out, to bridge the gap between us, but my voice was a mere whisper, lost in the vastness of the desert. The figures edged nearer, their presence overwhelming. They were Bedouins, I realized, nomads of the desert, their faces shrouded by traditional scarves to protect against the sands. Their conversation was laced with concern, their words hinting at the ancient laws of the desert, of respect and reverence for the land that sustains them. They spoke of the delicate equilibrium between man and nature, disturbed by my intrusion. The ground beneath me seemed to shift, a soft sinking sensation as the sand began to envelop me. I fought against it, a futile struggle against the desert's embrace. Sand invaded my mouth, my breaths becoming shallow, and the last thing I saw before succumbing to the darkness were the stars, indifferent in their eternal watch. When consciousness returned, I found myself within the confines of my tent. Dawn had broken, and my team stood over me, their faces etched with worry. They recounted their return, how they had found me buried up to my neck in sand, a victim of a sudden and violent sandstorm. I listened in silence, the memory of the parchment, the Bedouins, and their solemn words locked away within me. To speak of it would invite disbelief, perhaps even ridicule. Yet, in the quiet moments when the desert winds rise to a mournful howl, I can't help but recall that night. Was it all but a dream, a hallucination brought on by dehydration and isolation? Or was it a message, a reminder of the respect the desert commands? The world is full of mysteries, some of which are nestled beneath the shifting sands, known only to the desert itself.